March 19th, 2024. A quiet suburban neighborhood in Brandon, Mississippi, was shattered by gunshots that would forever change how America views juvenile justice. The shooter wasn't a hardened criminal or a career felon. It was Carly Gregg, a 14-year-old girl. What she did that day would land her behind bars with a sentence so severe that many believe it's actually worse than death itself. When the judge's gavel came down, Carly received life without the possibility of parole, making her one of the youngest people in United States history to face such a brutal sentence. But here's what most people don't understand about her punishment. By the end of this video, you'll see exactly why her existence in Mississippi's correctional system might be crueler than any execution chamber. Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal about her daily reality will shock you. The crime that sealed Carly's fate began like any other Tuesday afternoon. Surveillance cameras captured everything, and what they recorded was so disturbing that even seasoned prosecutors struggled to watch. The footage shows Carly pacing around her family home with a gun hidden behind her back. Then came the gunshots. Her mother, Ashley Smiley, lay dead from a headshot wound, murdered by her own daughter in their kitchen. But that was only the beginning of a horror that would unfold over the next hour. After killing her mother, Carly didn't panic. She didn't call for help. Instead, the surveillance video shows her calmly returning to the kitchen, texting on her phone, and playing with the family dogs as if nothing had happened. This wasn't a moment of rage or temporary insanity. This was calculated behavior that chilled everyone who witnessed it. When her stepfather Heath arrived home an hour later, Carly was waiting. She shot him in the shoulder, but Heath managed to wrestle the gun away and call for help. What happened next revealed the true depth of Carly's disturbing actions. She had used her dead mother's phone to text Heath, asking when he would be home. She had invited a friend over to the house, and in perhaps the most shocking detail of all, she showed that friend her mother's lifeless body. This wasn't a crime of passion or a tragic accident. This was premeditated murder carried out with a level of cold calculation that seemed impossible from someone so young. The trigger for this violence was deceptively simple. Just hours before the shooting, a friend had told Ashley about Carly's marijuana use. The confrontation that followed would cost Ashley her life and destroy what remained of their family. But understanding what led to this moment requires looking deeper into Carly's troubled mental state and the system that failed to protect everyone involved. The prosecution painted a picture of a manipulative teenager who knew exactly what she was doing. The defense argued she was a deeply disturbed child whose mental illness had reached a breaking point. The truth, as it often is, was somewhere in between both narratives. Dr. Andrew Clark, testifying for the defense, revealed the extent of Carly's psychological struggles in the months leading up to the shooting. She was battling depression, eating disorders, and engaging in self-harm. She was hearing voices and struggling with severe sleep difficulties. Just 1 week before she killed her mother, Carly had been prescribed a new antidepressant called Lexapro, which Dr. Clark testified had actually worsened her symptoms. The medication was supposed to help stabilize her mood, but instead it seemed to contribute to dissociation, auditory hallucinations, and dangerous mood swings. Her family had even tried equine-assisted therapy in a desperate attempt to help their troubled daughter. But when the prosecution cross-examined Dr. Clark, they delivered a devastating blow to the mental health defense. Assistant District Attorney Michael Smith asked a simple question that left the courtroom in stunned silence. "You agree that Carly tried to cover up the crime, right?" When Clark answered yes, Smith followed with the fatal question. "If you try and cover up a crime, doesn't that indicate that you know what you did?" That exchange effectively destroyed any hope of an insanity defense. The jury saw through Carly's attempts to claim she didn't understand her actions. The evidence of her calculated behavior after the shooting proved she knew exactly what she had done. The state of Mississippi offered Carly a plea deal that would have dramatically changed her fate. She could have served a 40-year sentence for her mother's murder, with the other charges dropped entirely. For a 14-year-old, this would have meant the possibility of freedom before she turned 55. Judge Arthur made extraordinary efforts to ensure Carly understood the consequences of rejecting this offer. But Carly and her legal team chose to roll the dice with a jury trial, a decision that would prove catastrophic. When the jury returned their verdict, they had rejected every argument about mental illness and youthful impulsivity. They saw a cold-blooded killer who deserved the harshest possible punishment. The sentence that followed was unprecedented in its severity. Life without the possibility of parole for a 14-year-old meant that Carly would never taste freedom again. She would spend every remaining day of her life behind bars, aging from a troubled teenager into an elderly woman in the custody of the Mississippi Department of Corrections. But what makes this sentence particularly cruel is where she's serving it and what awaits her as she grows older. The conditions she faces are so harsh that many argue death would be more merciful than decades of this existence. Carly is currently housed in the Youthful Offender Unit at Central Mississippi Correctional Facility, a supposedly separate facility designed for inmates under 18. But here's the terrifying reality she faces. When she turns 19, she'll be transferred to the adult prison population, thrown into one of the most dangerous and understaffed correctional systems in America. The Mississippi prison system is a nightmare of violence, sexual abuse, inadequate medical care, and complete institutional failure. Staff vacancy rates approach 50%, creating a lawless environment where the strongest prey on the weakest. The conditions inside Mississippi's correctional facilities are so appalling that federal investigators have documented systematic violations of basic human rights. Inmates live in constant fear of assault, with correctional officers often outnumbered 20-1 by the prison population. The facilities are infested with drugs, weapons flow freely through corrupt staff members, and medical care is virtually non-existent. Prisoners have died from treatable conditions while waiting weeks for basic medication. Sexual assault is rampant, and the administration either ignores complaints or actively covers them up. This is the world that awaits Carly Gregg in just a few short years. But even before she ages out of the youth facility, her current existence is far from protected or comfortable. The Youthful Offender Unit may sound like a gentler environment, but the reality is much darker. Carly spends most of her time in a cell barely larger than a bathroom, with limited human interaction and no meaningful programs to address the mental health issues that contributed to her crimes. The isolation is crushing for someone her age, when social development and human connection are crucial for psychological growth. Instead, she's learning to survive in an environment designed to warehouse rather than rehabilitate. The legal battle surrounding her sentence reveals just how broken the system truly is. Her new attorney, James Murphy, has filed appeals arguing that the entire sentencing process was fundamentally flawed from the beginning. He contends that Mississippi law doesn't actually permit life without parole for juveniles convicted of first-degree murder, only for capital murder cases. The distinction is critical because it suggests Carly was sentenced under the wrong legal framework entirely. Murphy also argues that she never received a mandatory Miller hearing, which is required by federal law to determine whether a juvenile should be eligible for parole consideration. The constitutional issues surrounding her case are staggering. The United States remains the only country in the world that sentences children to life without parole, a practice condemned by the United Nations as cruel and unusual punishment. International human rights organizations have repeatedly criticized America's juvenile justice system as barbarically harsh, pointing to cases like Carly's as evidence of a system that has lost its way. Even our closest allies refuse to extradite juvenile defendants to the United States, specifically because of sentences like the one Carly received. What makes her situation even more tragic is how rushed her entire case was from beginning to end. She was indicted barely 2 months after the shooting and brought to trial within 6 months. For a case involving complex mental health issues, extensive medical records, and disputed motives, this timeline was extraordinarily compressed. Defense attorneys barely had time to conduct proper psychological evaluations or gather crucial background information that might have explained her actions. The system seemed more interested in securing a conviction than understanding what had gone so catastrophically wrong in this teenager's life. Mississippi's approach to juvenile mental health care reveals another layer of institutional failure. The state has only 519 school therapists for over 1,000 public schools, creating a student to counselor. The ratio is 400 to 1. There are just 15 licensed child and adolescent psychiatrists practicing in the entire state. This means that troubled children like Carly fall through massive cracks in a system that's already overwhelmed and underfunded. When she was clearly showing signs of severe psychological distress, the resources simply weren't available to provide adequate intervention. The medication issue that contributed to her breakdown highlights another systemic problem. Lexapro, the antidepressant prescribed just days before the shooting, can actually increase suicidal and violent thoughts in teenagers during the initial weeks of treatment. This is a well-documented side effect that requires careful monitoring and gradual adjustment. But in Mississippi's broken mental health system, there wasn't adequate follow-up care to track how the medication was affecting her deteriorating mental state. The very treatment meant to help her may have pushed her over the edge into violence. Now Carly faces decades of this existence with no hope of change or redemption. Unlike death row inmates who at least have appeals processes and advocacy groups fighting for them, she has virtually no legal recourse. Her sentence is considered final, and the appeals process for juvenile life sentences is notoriously difficult. Most attorneys won't even take these cases because the chances of success are so minimal. She's essentially been written off by a system that decided a 14-year-old was beyond salvation. The psychological impact of knowing you'll never be free again is devastating for anyone, but it's particularly cruel for someone who's still essentially a child. Carly will watch other inmates come and go while she remains trapped in the same concrete box year after year. She'll see guards retire and be replaced while her routine stays exactly the same. She'll experience every holiday, birthday, and milestone knowing that nothing will ever change for her. So here we find ourselves confronting an uncomfortable truth about American justice. Carly Gregg sits in that cell today, barely 16 years old, facing a future that stretches endlessly into nothingness. Death would have been swift, final, perhaps even merciful. But this sentence offers no such release. She will wake up tomorrow in that same concrete box, and the day after that, and every day for the next 60 or 70 years until her body finally gives out. The isolation will eat away at her mind. The violence around her will become routine. The complete absence of hope will hollow out whatever humanity remains. Her crime was unforgivable, her actions beyond comprehension. But as we've seen throughout this investigation, her punishment may be something far worse than death itself. A slow psychological execution that lasts a lifetime. The question that haunts me, and should haunt all of us, is simple. In our pursuit of justice, have we created something more monstrous than the crime itself? I want to hear what you think in the comments below. Is life without parole for a 14-year-old actually justice? Or is it revenge disguised as law? Does Carly Gregg deserve this fate? Or does her age and mental state demand something different? Tell me your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into cases that challenge everything we think we know about crime and punishment.